My mother told an entire church I had been missing for 4 years. The truth was, she knew exactly where I lived. What she really missed was the $1,400 I had sent every month, 72 payments totaling $100,800. Then she staged a public reunion, promised I would forgive her, and printed my name in the program without asking me. My name is Elowen Kessler, and when I walked into Grace Harbor with the bank records and proof she knew my address, my mother's miracle began to collapse. It started when my brother saw me outside my daughter's preschool. Chapter 1. The month I stopped paying. On September 28, 2025, my brother found me standing outside the West Asheville Early Learning Cooperative with a 3-year-old holding my hand and a fan of blue paint samples tucked under my arm. Silas had come to Asheville for an advanced heat pump certification course. I had come to pick up my daughter. Neither of us was supposed to be part of the other person's day. He stopped beside his truck and stared at me as if the dead had learned how to carry groceries. His face lost its color. My first instinct was not to hug him or ask how he had been. I moved Willa behind my right leg and placed one hand on her shoulder. Willa leaned around me and looked up at him. She asked if he was one of my friends. Before I could answer, she tugged my sleeve and called me Mom. I watched Silas absorb that single word. His gaze moved from Willa's face to mine, then down to the small lunch bag hanging from her wrist. He understood that the family had not only lost access to me, they had missed an entire child. He finally said my name. His voice sounded careful, almost frightened. He asked if I was really standing there. I told him I was. Then he said something that made the September air feel colder. Mom has been telling everyone at Grace Harbor that you've been missing for 4 years. I looked at him, waiting for the rest. Silas explained that my photograph had appeared in church bulletins and prayer requests. Darlene had called me her missing daughter. She told people no one knew where I was, that she still set a place for me during holidays, and that she prayed every night for a sign that I was alive. I did not give Silas the emotional reaction he expected. I asked him one question. Did she start calling me missing before or after the $1,400 stopped arriving on the 1st of every month? His mouth opened, but no answer came out. Willa pressed closer to my side. I could feel her fingers tightening around mine, so I lowered my voice. I told Silas that I would give him a number he could use to contact me, but there would be rules. He could not share my address. He could not bring Darlene to my house. He could not tell anyone about Willa unless I gave permission. Silas nodded, then admitted our mother already knew he was in Asheville and would question him when he returned to Morganton. He said he could not pretend he had not seen me. I allowed him to confirm one thing, that I was alive. Nothing about my neighborhood, my job, my house, or my daughter. As Willa and I walked away, I looked back once. Silas was still beside his truck, watching us leave. He did not follow. That was the first boundary he respected. The drive home took less than 15 minutes, but it carried me back 10 years. In 2015, I was 26 and had finally secured a stable respiratory therapy position at Mission Hospital. My mother worked part-time at a dental office. My father, Everett, had recently retired after years maintaining vehicles for the city. Silas was 23, changing jobs every few months and talking about trade certifications he never seemed able to finish. On October 1st, 2015, Darlene called after my father's knee surgery. She said the family needed $1,400 a month for 3 months. The money would keep them current on the mortgage and cover living expenses while Everett recovered. My father already had a pension and health insurance, but Darlene never showed me their full finances. Instead, she reminded me that Silas could not support himself and that Everett had spent his life taking care of us. Then she used the phrase that had controlled me since childhood. I was the strong one. Strong did not mean loved in our house. It meant available. It meant the person who could absorb one more problem without making anyone else uncomfortable. I agreed because 3 months sounded temporary. Darlene thanked me with such relief that I felt ashamed for having hesitated. She never ordered me to pay. She made refusing sound like proof that I had forgotten who had raised me. 3 months passed. The transfers continued. Whenever I tried to bring up an ending date, a new emergency appeared. There was a prescription the insurance supposedly would not cover a repair on Everett's car, a property tax shortage, or a fee Silas needed for training. The bills were always urgent, but I was rarely allowed to see them. If I asked too many questions, Darlene became quiet and wounded. Everett disappeared into silence. Silas told me everyone was doing their best. I kept paying because each month looked smaller than the conflict required to stop it. From October 1, 2015 through September 1, 2021, I made 72 transfers of $1,400 each. The exact total was $100,800. I did not see that number while I was living inside it. I saw only 1 month at a time. Darlene had turned a 3-month request into the financial foundation of the family, then taught all of us to treat that arrangement as normal. When Willa and I reached our bungalow, she ran to the front steps and held one of the paint samples against the old white door. She chose the darkest blue and asked whether we could start painting that weekend. I told her we could. The house had 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and floors that creaked in the winter. It was not evidence that I had become wealthy after leaving my family. It was evidence that my money had finally been allowed to remain in my own life. That evening, Silas texted the private number. He said he had told Darlene only that I was alive. He had not mentioned Willa or given her my address. Then he told me what our mother had asked. She had not asked whether I looked healthy. She had not asked where I worked or whether I needed anything. She wanted to know whether Silas could bring me to Grace Harbor Community Church. 2 days later, another message arrived. Silas sent a photograph of the church bulletin for Homecoming Sunday on October 19th. My old college photograph filled half the page. Beneath it, Darlene had been described as a mother who had never surrendered hope. The program suggested the congregation might witness a miracle reunion with a daughter missing for 4 years. I enlarged the image and read it again. There was no mention of the money. No mention of the message I had sent before ending the transfers. No mention of the fact that no police report or welfare check had ever been requested. Near the bottom of the program was a section titled, "A Daughter Comes Home." My name was printed beneath it. I stood at the kitchen counter while Willa arranged the blue paint samples from lightest to darkest. The ordinary sound of her humming made the bulletin feel even more obscene. Darlene had taken my brother's accidental discovery and turned it into a public performance before speaking one word to me. A final message appeared from Silas. "Mom reserved a chair for you near the stage. She told Reverend Malcolm that you agreed to come back and speak about forgiveness." I read the message twice. My mother had not asked whether I wanted to return. She had not asked whether I forgave her. She had not even asked if I was willing to enter the building. She had already assigned me a seat, written my role, and promised everyone an ending. All she needed now was for me to obey the script. Chapter 2. What $800 cost me. What Darlene never understood was that I had already spent 6 years rehearsing obedience in smaller scenes. At Mission Hospital, I worked 3 12-hour shifts each week and usually accepted 2 additional shifts every month. I told myself the overtime protected my parents from falling behind. In reality, it protected me from the guilt Darlene knew how to create whenever the first of the month approached. One winter morning, Janelle Ortiz found me asleep in my car between shifts. The engine was off, my coat was folded beneath my head, and a takeout dinner from the night before sat unopened on the passenger seat. She tapped on the window until I woke up. Janelle asked when I had last slept in a bed. I told her I was fine. She looked at the untouched food, then at the red marks my hospital badge had left against my neck. She said, "You are a good respiratory therapist, Elowen, but being good does not make you indestructible." She offered me a more stable schedule with fewer nights and no automatic holiday rotation. I wanted it so badly that I could already imagine waking up without an alarm in the dark. Then I calculated the lost overtime and saw $1,400 disappearing from my parents' account. I told her I only needed a few more months. By then, I had been saying that for years. In May 2018, I finally called Darlene and tried to change the arrangement. I had reviewed my own rent, insurance, student loan payment, and retirement balance. After sending money to my parents, there was almost nothing left for emergencies of my own. I told her I needed to reduce the monthly amount. I also offered to pay verified bills directly instead of transferring cash into her account. The silence on the phone lasted long enough to become punishment. Then Darlene asked when I had started treating my parents like people who might lie to me. She reminded me that Everett had worked for years to support us and that Silas was still trying to establish himself. In the background, I heard my father clear his throat. He was close enough to hear every word, but he did not speak. After the call, Silas sent me a message. "Mom is crying. Dad still is not fully recovered. Can you please do it for one more month?" "One more month" was the phrase our family used whenever they wanted forever without having to say it. I gave in. A few weeks later, Darlene said the roof needed to be replaced before the next storm season. The estimate, according to her, was $8,400. She used that number to justify keeping the transfer unchanged for another 6 months. I accepted a Thanksgiving shift and canceled the weekend trip Graham and I had planned. He had reserved a small cabin near Boone. I told him the hospital needed me, but he knew I had volunteered for the shift. Graham never demanded that I cut off my family. He only asked why a woman who worked as much as I did still checked her bank balance before buying lunch. Then he asked something harder. "Why do you live like you owe everyone for being allowed to exist?" I did not have an answer. Years later, the only roofing record we would find was a receipt for a $475 patch. That did not prove every remaining dollar had been stolen. It proved that the explanation I had been given was not true. Graham and I married on June 20, 2020. He worked as a commercial electrician for Ridgeline Electrical Contractors. He did not rescue me from my family because he understood that people cannot be dragged across boundaries they are not ready to hold. He simply showed me that care could exist without an invoice attached to it. On August 13, 2021, a lifting platform failed at one of his job sites. A company representative came to my apartment with a supervisor and a man from Human Resources. I knew before they spoke because neither of them would sit down. Graham's funeral was held on August 21. I remember very little of the service. I remember his work boots near the memorial table, the smell of lilies and the pressure of people's hands on my shoulders. I remember returning home and seeing his coffee mug beside the sink. 4 days later, Darlene called. She asked whether I was eating and said she had been praying for me. For a few seconds, I thought grief might have changed the distance between us. Then she asked if the September transfer would still arrive on time. I heard Everett breathing near the phone. He was there again, close enough to intervene and silent enough to benefit. Something inside me became very still. My husband had been dead for 12 days and my parents were already checking whether his death might interrupt their payment. The automatic transfer went through on September 1. It was the last one. On September 14, I learned I was pregnant. I sat in my car outside the clinic with the test results in my lap and one hand pressed against my mouth. Graham was gone, but a part of the life we had planned was still moving forward without him. For the first time, the money leaving my account no longer felt like a decision affecting only me. Every dollar I surrendered was a dollar taken from the child I would have to raise alone. On September 28th, I canceled the automatic transfer. Before doing it, I sent Darlene and Everett an email and a text message. I told them I would no longer provide monthly financial support. I said I needed space to grieve and would contact them when I was ready. I saved the email as a PDF. I kept the text messages and the bank statements I had downloaded over the years. Some older statements were missing, but the bank still maintained archived records that could later be requested. Darlene's version of my absence changed gradually. First, she told people I was busy. Then I was angry. After that, I had abandoned my family. Eventually, she began saying no one knew where I was. By the time the church bulletins used the words missing daughter, the original truth had disappeared. She never filed a missing person report. She never requested a welfare check or gave my information to law enforcement. When Silas once asked why, she said she did not want to get me in trouble. What she meant was that an official search might produce an official answer. I was alive, employed, paying taxes, maintaining my professional license, and choosing not to speak to her. Willa was born on April 26, 2022. After her birth, I accepted the stable schedule Janelle had offered years earlier. I stopped sleeping in my car and started eating dinner at home, often with Willa in a high chair beside me. In August 2023, I bought the bungalow in West Asheville for $318,000. I used $63,600 for the down payment drawn from my savings and part of Graham's $175,000 life insurance policy. The remaining mortgage was mine alone. What remained of the insurance stayed protected for emergencies and Willa's future. I had not become wealthy after leaving my family. I had simply stopped financing emergencies that never ended. That was why the missing daughter's story disturbed me so deeply. I had never disappeared. I had only withdrawn access. My phone rang while I was putting the church bulletin into a folder. Silas sounded different this time, quieter and more certain. He said he had found something proving Darlene knew my West Asheville address on December 6, 2024. For several seconds, I could hear only Willa moving her paint samples across the kitchen table. Then I told Silas not to send the image through any application that might strip its metadata. I told him to preserve the original file and stop confronting Darlene until we understood exactly what he had found. Because if my mother had known where I lived and continued calling me missing, this was no longer grief exaggerated for sympathy. It was a lie she had chosen to maintain. Chapter 3. The Woman They Called Missing. The proof did not come from a detective, a courtroom, or some dramatic anonymous package. It came from my brother, finally asking questions that had been inconvenient for him to ask before. Silas called me the next morning from his truck outside the HVAC company where he worked in Morganton. He had gone to our parents' house after returning from Asheville and told Darlene only that I was alive. He had not mentioned Willa or revealed where I lived. She kept asking if you looked sick, but not because she was worried, he said. She wanted to know whether you seemed confused or unstable. Did you answer her? I said you looked like someone picking up her daughter from preschool. I closed my eyes. You told her about Willa. I said daughter before I realized what I was doing. I'm sorry, it was a breach, but at least he admitted it without blaming me for trusting him. When Silas asked why Darlene had never filed a missing person report, she accused me of punishing the entire family. Then she pulled out a folder of household expenses to prove how much she had carried after I left. Inside the folder was a handwritten ledger. Silas sent photographs of several pages. Each line showed a date $1,400 and a short note. Some notes referred to the mortgage or utilities. Others carried his name: used truck repair for Silas, HVAC tools, certification fee. I called him immediately. Mom told me they paid for all of that, he said. They did pay for it, they just used my money. His breathing became uneven. I should have asked. Yes, I was 23 and broke. So was I after sending the money. He did not defend himself after that. Silas also found the receipt for the roof. The amount was $475, not $8,400. He photographed it and returned everything to the folder. The originals remained in Darlene's house, but the images gave me enough information to compare against my bank records. Then he asked Darlene how she could be sure I was safe if she did not know where I lived. According to Silas, she became almost smug. She opened the photo library on her phone and showed him a picture of an envelope addressed to me. She said she always knew you were safe, he told me. Like that somehow made everything better. The original file had been created on December 6, 2024. My full West Asheville address was visible beneath my name. Silas copied the file through a secure transfer that preserved its original date and file information. The envelope had come from my grandmother, Inez Hayes. I called her that afternoon. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, but she recognized me before I finished saying my name. Elowen, honey, are you all right? I'm safe, Grandma. I need to ask you about a Christmas card. The silence that followed was different from Darlene's silences. It carried fear, not punishment. Inez admitted she had kept my address private because I had asked her to. Every Christmas I sent her a short card so she would know Willa and I were safe. In late 2024, the tremor in her hands had worsened, and she asked Darlene to help address a card back to me. Your mother saw the old envelope, Inez said. I made her promise not to copy the address. She photographed it. Oh, Elowen. Inez rarely attended Grace Harbor anymore because walking had become difficult. Darlene had told her I was estranged and needed space, never that the church was being told I had vanished. Then Inez told me something I had not known. On November 19, 2010, Darlene had pawned her wedding ring to help Inez and my grandfather cover a medical deductible. Inez still had the old household notebook recording the amount and the day Darlene brought the money. That history did not excuse my mother, but it explained part of her. Darlene had learned that love was proven by financial pain. Instead of questioning that lesson, she passed it down and made my endurance the measure of my loyalty. A week later, I sat across from Celia Boone in her Asheville office. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. I placed my statement, saved email, church bulletin, ledger photographs, roof receipt, and the original envelope file on her conference table. Celia reviewed everything without promising me a victory. "Can I recover the money?" I asked. "Not simply because the reasons you were given may have been misleading," she said. "There is no written loan agreement, no repayment schedule, and no clear promise that these transfers would be returned. The age of the payments creates additional limitations, so legally they can keep it. I'm saying recovery would be difficult and uncertain. I'm not saying what happened was acceptable." She explained that calling me missing did not automatically create a criminal case. A civil defamation claim would require specific false statements, publication timing, and actual harm. North Carolina also imposed a short filing period for those claims. What can I do now? Preserve everything. Demand that they stop using your name and image. Request a correction. Document any new publication or measurable harm. Celia emphasized that a letter from her office would be a demand, not a court order. She also submitted limited records requests to local law enforcement. The responses found no missing person report or welfare check initiated by my family during the relevant period. Darlene had wanted the sympathy of a search without the scrutiny of one. I still did not want to attend Homecoming Sunday. Evidence could prove what Darlene had said, but it could not control what people wanted to believe. I knew how easily a calm woman could be labeled cold when the other person cried first. That evening, Willa tried to move the blue paint supplies by herself. The lid slipped and paint spread across the kitchen floor. She froze. "Mommy, do you still love me?" The question hurt more than the mess. I knelt beside her and took her hands. "I love you when the floor is clean, and I love you when there is paint everywhere. You're not mad I'm surprised? We can clean surprised." Her shoulders relaxed. We wiped the floor together, leaving one pale blue stain near the cabinet. As I watched her, I understood what was at stake. Willa had already begun testing whether mistakes could make love disappear. I would not let her inherit a family system where affection had to be purchased through obedience. With Celia beside me on speakerphone, I called Reverend Malcolm Reeves. At first he said the church did not want to become involved in a private family dispute. Celia answered calmly. Grace Harbor became involved when it published my client's name, photograph, and alleged status without her permission. Malcolm admitted he had never seen a missing person report. He also confirmed that Darlene claimed I had agreed to attend and speak about forgiveness. "I never agreed to any of that," I said. After reviewing the documents, Malcolm canceled Darlene's planned presentation. He offered me 5 minutes in the fellowship hall after the service to correct the record. I arranged for Willa to stay with her regular caregiver. Then I copied the documents Celia approved, placed them in a folder, and locked every original inside my desk. I was not going to Grace Harbor to recover $100,800. I was not going to demand an apology or force strangers to choose sides. I was going because my mother had spent 4 years speaking for a woman she claimed no one could find. This time that woman was going to be in the room. Chapter 4. The Reunion. She had already scripted. On October 19, 2025, I left Willa with the caregiver who had watched her since infancy and drove east toward Morganton with a folder on the passenger seat. Every page inside was a copy Celia had approved. The originals remained locked in my desk at home. No attorney followed me. No police officer waited outside the church. I was not arriving with an army. I was arriving with records. Grace Harbor Community Church looked smaller than I remembered. The brick walls had faded, but the white steeple in Fellowship Hall were unchanged. Cars filled the parking lot for Homecoming Sunday. Through the windows, I could see folding tables covered with casseroles, pies, and pitchers of sweet tea. Silas arrived alone and entered through a side door. Inez had come with a church member who helped her walk. Neither waited beside my car. We had agreed that I would enter on my own. The worship service had already ended when I approached the fellowship hall. Reverend Malcolm stood near the front, quietly removing several printed programs from a table. Darlene was speaking beside him in a navy dress with a pearl pin at her collar. She was telling the room about 4 years of prayer, empty chairs at Thanksgiving, and a mother's faith that her child would come home. Then the door closed behind me. The room did not erupt into applause. A few people gasped. Several turned slowly. Some recognized me immediately, while others studied my face against the old photograph printed in the bulletin. A woman near the dessert table whispered my name. Another folded her arms as if my existence were an accusation. Darlene saw me and pressed one hand against her chest. Her expression changed so quickly that I knew she had practiced the moment. She crossed the room with both arms open. My baby. I stepped back before she could touch me. Her hands remained suspended between us. Phones had already begun to rise around the room, and I understood what she wanted. One photograph of an embrace could replace every question with a simpler story. "Everyone has prayed for this," she said. "Come with me." She reached for my wrist, but Reverend Malcolm moved between us. "Elowen has asked to correct information that was published about her. We agreed she would have 5 minutes." Darlene stared at him. "This is our family. It became a church matter when her name and photograph were printed." The room quieted. I walked to the front and placed my folder on the lectern. My hands were cold, but my voice remained steady. "I am not here to ask anyone to judge my mother. I am here to correct specific statements made about me." I held up the first page. "I was never reported missing. My family did not request a welfare check, and no law enforcement agency conducted a search for me. Before I ended contact, I sent written notice that I needed space after my husband's death." Darlene shook her head. "You disappeared without caring what it did to us. I withdrew contact. That is not the same as disappearing." I gave Malcolm the summary of my bank statements. From October 1st, 2015 through September 1st, 2021, I sent my parents 72 payments of $1,400. The total was $100,800. The language describing me as missing appeared after those payments stopped. A murmur moved through the room. Darlene's face tightened. "That money helped your family." I am not denying that I sent it. I am explaining what was omitted from the story told here. I placed the next document in front of Malcolm. It was a printout showing the original photograph file, its creation date, and the envelope containing my address. This image was taken on December 6, 2024. My West Asheville address is visible. By that date, my mother knew where I lived. Darlene moved toward me. "I knew you were safe. That is what matters." I looked at her. "You cannot say you knew I was safe and continue telling people no one knew where I was. Both statements cannot be true." Inez lifted herself slowly from her chair. Darlene saw that envelope when she helped me address a Christmas card. I asked her not to copy Elowen's address. Darlene turned toward her. "Mother, you don't understand." "I understand what I asked you to do." Silas stood next. His face was pale, but he did not look at me for permission. "Some of Elowen's money paid for my truck repairs, HVAC tools, and certification. Mom told me she and Dad covered those expenses. I never asked where the money came from because not asking made my life easier." He sat down before anyone could praise him. His admission was not heroic. It was overdue. I handed Malcolm the roof receipt. In 2018, I was told the house needed a full roof replacement, costing $8,400. The only receipt found was for a $475 repair. I cannot tell you where every dollar went. I can tell you that some reasons I was given were not accurate. Darlene's composure finally cracked. "You think you are the only woman who ever sacrificed for her family? In 2010, I pawned my wedding ring to help my parents. I did what a good daughter does." Inez's voice cut through the room. "That happened, and I have never forgotten it. But I did not ask you to make your daughter pay for the rest of her life." For the first time, Darlene had no immediate answer. Then she pointed toward Everett. "The money was for your father." My father sat near the wall, both hands resting on his knees. I looked directly at him. "Was all of it for you?" His eyes dropped to the floor. That silence answered more than a speech could have. Darlene turned back to me, but she did not ask how Graham had died. She did not ask how I survived pregnancy or grief without him. She did not ask Willa's name. Instead, she said the words that revealed what she feared losing. "You are destroying everything I built in this church." There it was. Not grief, not love, reputation. "You can still fix this," she continued. "Come home for holidays. Let us meet the child. Help your father the way you used to. We can put this behind us." She did not want me back as a woman with a home, a career, and boundaries. She wanted the strong daughter who paid on time and accepted silence as gratitude. I am not performing forgiveness for you, I said. I was never missing, and you knew where I lived. Willa will not grow up believing love comes with a bill. Reverend Malcolm removed the remaining programs from the table. The portion titled A Daughter Comes Home is canceled. Church leadership will review how Elowen's name and image were used. There will be no further presentation today. Some people approached me with apologies. Others whispered that family problems should remain private. A few stayed beside Darlene. Several older women watched me in silence, their expressions carrying recognition rather than celebration. No one applauded. I collected my folder and left before Darlene could demand another photograph, another embrace, or another ending. Everett caught up with me in the parking lot. "Elowen, wait!" I stopped beside my car but did not unlock it. He looked older in the afternoon light. "I knew enough to ask questions," he said. "I didn't ask because the money helped and keeping quiet made my life easier. You heard her ask about the September payment 12 days after Graham died? I know. You were silent then, too." His face folded with shame. I was. After a long pause, he asked whether he could meet Willa. I did not say never. I did not mistake confession for change either. Not today. I got into my car and drove toward Asheville. I did not know whether my father was finally changing or merely frightened of losing someone else. For the first time, I did not have to decide before I was ready. Chapter 5. The door I chose to close. 2 days after Homecoming Sunday, Celia sent Darlene a formal demand letter. It required her to preserve every bulletin, photograph, message ledger, and church document connected to the missing daughter story. It also demanded that she stop using my name and image, stop describing me as missing, and issue a correction to the people who had received the false account. Celia reminded me that the letter was not a court order. It could not force Darlene to apologize, and it did not transform $100,800 of family support into a legally recoverable debt. I told her I understood. That was no longer the outcome I needed. On October 26, Grace Harbor Community Church posted a short correction in its weekly bulletin and mailed it to members who had received the homecoming program. It stated that previous materials had described me as missing, that the church possessed no official missing person report, and that my name and photograph had been used without my authorization. Reverend Malcolm did not publicly shame Darlene. The church leadership asked her to step away from the homecoming committee, the prayer group, and all public representative roles for the remainder of 2025. The consequences matched the choices that created them. Darlene had used money to preserve control, so she lost all access to my finances. She had claimed exclusive ownership of the past, so the community was required to acknowledge another version. She had turned the church into a stage, so she lost her position on that stage. She had demanded a public reunion, and I refused to perform one. Most importantly, she did not gain access to Willa. 3 church members sent apologies to my private number. 2 others told me I had humiliated my mother and should have handled everything at home. 1 woman wrote that family problems belonged behind closed doors. I deleted none of the messages, but I answered only the respectful ones. I had spent too many years treating every person's disappointment as a problem I was required to solve. If I still needed the whole congregation to approve of me, Darlene could continue controlling me through their opinions. In early November, a thick envelope arrived at my bungalow. Darlene's handwriting covered 6 pages. She wrote about her humiliation, her sleepless nights, and the pain of being contradicted in front of people who respected her. She insisted that everything she had done came from love. She did not acknowledge photographing my address. She did not admit telling Reverend Malcolm that I had agreed to speak. She did not apologize for asking about the September payment 12 days after Graham died. The letter asked for forgiveness without naming what needed to be forgiven. I did not tear it apart. I placed it in the same file as the bank records and church bulletins. Then I returned the file to my locked desk and made dinner with Willa. Darlene did not receive a reply. Everett took a different approach. He did not call repeatedly or send Silas and Inez to argue for him. He did not ask again to meet Willa. Once a month, he sent a short message saying he hoped we were safe. He never added a demand. On January 10, 2026, I agreed to meet him at a diner in Asheville. I chose a booth near the front window and arrived before him. He looked smaller than he had in the church parking lot. Everett ordered coffee, but barely touched it. He said he wanted to explain, and I told him explanation would not erase what happened. He nodded. My father admitted that his pension and insurance had covered more than Darlene allowed me to believe. He knew the surgery had not created a 6-year emergency. He also knew she avoided showing me bills. He had asked her questions in private, but when she became angry, he stopped. Keeping quiet protected his marriage. My payments covered expenses he did not want to confront, and my exhaustion happened far enough away that he could pretend not to see it. I reminded him of the telephone call after Graham's funeral. Everett lowered his eyes and said he had heard everything. He had known Darlene was about to ask about the money, and he had remained beside her without stopping it. I told him that admitting the truth mattered, but it did not return the 6 years he had watched me carry his silence. He asked whether respecting my boundaries might eventually earn him a chance to meet Willa. I told him that boundaries were not a test he could pass to receive a child as a reward. If he changed, he had to change because it was right, even if I never gave him what he wanted. He accepted that answer. I left the diner without promising another meeting, but I also left without feeling responsible for his sadness. Silas spent those same months correcting the story with relatives. He told them I had not vanished, that he had benefited from my money, and that he had participated by refusing to ask where it came from. He stopped carrying messages from Darlene and never requested access to Willa. On February 7, I agreed to have coffee with him. He did not ask me to call him a good brother. He said one set of photographs could not repair years of convenience. I told him trust could not return faster than it had been damaged. He said he understood. For the first time, I believed he might. We did not leave the coffee shop as a restored family. We left with a narrow opening and no promise that it would become wider. At Mission Hospital, Janelle later asked whether I wanted an additional holiday shift. For years I had accepted before she finished the question. This time I said no. There was no emergency waiting in Morganton. No payment was due on the 1st of the month. I finished my scheduled shift, drove home, and ate dinner with my daughter. I stopped thinking of the $100,800 as a treasure I had to recover before I could heal. It became evidence of how long I had been valued according to my usefulness. I had authorized every transfer, and I accepted that truth. But responsibility was not the same as taking all the blame. Those payments existed inside a system built from guilt, incomplete information, and the convenient silence of everyone who benefited. I also understood that Darlene had once been harmed by the same belief she passed to me. She had learned that love required financial suffering. Understanding that history allowed me to release some of my anger, but it did not require me to reopen my life to her. Understanding was not absolution. Forgiveness was not access. On March 14, Willa and I finally painted the front door blue. She wore an oversized shirt and held the brush with both hands. Near the bottom corner, she pulled the paint in the wrong direction and left a crooked streak. Months earlier, spilling paint had made her ask whether I still loved her. This time she looked at the mark and laughed. I laughed with her. We painted around the streak and left part of it visible beneath the final coat. It became our small signature proof that something could be imperfect without becoming unsafe. When we finished, Willa stepped onto the porch and examined the door. She asked who would be allowed to come through it. I did not give her a list of names. I told her the door was for people who knew how to love us without making us pay for the privilege of being loved. That evening, we carried the brushes inside and sat down to dinner. Before joining her, I looked once at the blue door and closed it gently behind me. I had not defeated my mother. I had done something more important. I had stopped allowing money to determine my worth, stopped allowing a church bulletin to define my life, and stopped teaching my daughter that love could disappear after one mistake. I had never been missing. I had only stopped appearing in a place where people remembered me most clearly on the first day of every month. If someone you loved understood why they hurt you, but still refused to take responsibility, would you open the door again? Share your answer or your own experience in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about women who chose peace without surrendering their boundaries.